And how would you get the chemical where you wanted it at the time you wanted it? On a golf course where you might have a 5-mile main line. And so it becomes very, very tricky, and it might not even be possible. So what you end up doing is having a continuous injection process. A lot of guys around here use euphoric acid, and they inject euphoric acid continuously. It's a fertilizer, and they just keep a very light dilution of that acid in the system all the time. So whenever any head is running, it's also fertilizing. And it just, that way, it'll average itself out over that whole golf course over the whole season. And as they change, they might change concentration. They might at times want to put on a little heavier dose, but they'll do it for a week. So it has a whole week to cycle around and work its way uniformly through the entire piping system. Yeah, it becomes very complicated, you lose the precision that you might have like on a center pivot, which is next on the list, where we can be very precise with one of those. But golf course is the toughest by far. It is the toughest one to manage. And so there's a lot of stuff we're not going to be able to ever inject on a golf course, but we certainly can do fertilizers, because everything's plastic out there. Even if the fertilizer's in the water continuously, it's not going to destroy anything, as long as we have plastic. And there will be times when you'll shut the injection off and it'll eventually flush the system out of that material. But in a lot of cases, you're just going to have constant injection. All the time, fertilizer, very, very diluted in the water. So every time you water, you're effectively foliar feeding your grass. And there are a lot of courses that use that process, a lot of them around. Ain't cheap, but once it gets going, it's very, very effective. Center pivots. Well, here's a deal where we need to keep very uniform flow of chemical at all times, because it's a moving system. Anytime you have a moving system, the chemical has to be extremely well metered so that you have exactly the same amount of chemical on every square foot as that thing's walking across the field. And so there we have to have a precise injection system. Almost always it's going to be an injection pump. And it's very common because we have the power right at the source. We can inject at the pivot point or at a cluster point at the edge of the field. And at both points we're going to have live power available. So we have really a perfect situation for injection pumps when we're dealing with center pivots. And we can regulate the flow. We can, if we need more flow, we just double up the pumps. Sometimes you want to put a lot of chemical on real fast, bring in 2 pumps and inject double the amount that you can do with 1 pump. Or if you want to meter it out very slowly, there's some guys that like to inject fertilizer almost constantly while they're growing their potatoes. They can do that. They can set it up for a real low rate of continuous injection of fertilizer, and it's going on all summer while they're watering their crops. Drip. Now drip, here we have long run times. Back to long run times, similar to hand line, wheel line, solid set. So we can get away with some of these different types of systems. So the Venturi system would work, and we could go out and place them in isolated areas and do individual laterals if we wanted to, and just put a Venturi in line with that individual lateral and run a drip feeding system that way. But we really have to be concerned about filtration at this point. If anything could mess up a drip system, it could be fertilizer or any chemical that ends up precipitating out. It'd just be an instant plug in an emitter. So you really have to monitor the material that you're injecting and also the particulates that are moving down that line.
With the injection pump, do you ever have a mixing chamber on it?
No, the mixing occurs in the pipe where it enters into the pipe with just the velocity of the water going through it will create the mixing effect that you want. Now, you may have a diluted chemical to begin with. That's done in the tank at the front end. So if we wanted to put 20 ounces of a chemical in 50 gallons of water, we could just do it right there in our little 50, or I guess that's a 30-gallon drum. If we wanted to put 20 ounces of chemical in a 30-gallon drum, mix 30 gallons with it, there's our mix. But then we're injecting a diluted chemical. As it goes into the water supply line, just the agitation as it's going down the main line will create the mixing necessary. No, we don't take a little of this one and a little of this one into a chamber to do them. Of course, it could be done. Anything's possible, but it'd be, if you had enough money, you could make one and make it work. That's the interesting thing. Anything is possible. If you can throw enough money at it, you can make it. And
I've seen it in farm applications, but in the greenhouse, I've seen a lot of mixing chambers.
Now, what do you mean by mixing chamber exactly?
Well, they'll inject the chemical into, I don't know, it almost looks like, when you flush a toilet, it spins in a little circle of water, and they'll inject the chemical into there, and then it mixes with the water and goes out the other end of the line.
Oh, so they're talking about in greenhouses where they actually are injecting a liquid at a pretty high rate, and they want to get it blended because the first outlet's very close to where the mixing is occurring. So they actually create a vortex, a chamber to force it to mix within that chamber before it, because the first sprinkler or spray head or whatever or drip emitter might be 5 feet down the way, and they don't want it to getting mainlined with some real high chemical that hasn't mixed yet. I could see how that might work. It's a good point. Never seen one, but it sure does make sense.
Yeah, it's growing in our greenhouse.
And so all you have to do is you got to get that water. If you get it to spin, then it creates turbulence, which blends the liquids together. Excellent. See, we all learn something every day.